All right. Well, welcome to another Got Questions.
Hey, before we get started, man, have
Yeah.
y'all ever had white Kit Kats?
No,
Those things are bomb, dude.
The white chocolate?
I've
I'll
never
tell
had
you
one of
what.
those. I've
Wow.
never tried one. Wow. Was it?
Yeah.
Does it taste pretty like a normal Kit Kat, but not?
Oh, it's just white chocolate, dude.
All right, we
Good.
should try one of those.
I got some for you in my office. Come on by.
All right, that's awesome. All right, well, welcome to another Got Questions. Oh
You just
man,
totally took Matt off his game.
it was.
That is
Oh man,
completely
it was. Oh man, so
See you next time.
that's it. We're all done here. And so we actually got our first question on YouTube that we're gonna look at this morning, and we got Mr. Randy here, one of our Zulon ministry leaders, and also the MC of our Mr. Got Questions podcast. We got Mr. Garrett, one of our Zulon ministry leaders, student ministry leaders, and also in our communications department. He does a great job with that. We got Pastor Kevin Hassenfuss here with us, the man, the myth, the legend. He is what makes reptiles cool. He is the next crocodile hunter or king, whatever. I can't remember his name right now, but the crocodile hunter.
Yeah.
He is our student ministries pastor and high school ministry pastor. And we got a fun question. It's good to see everyone. You all look good. You all look good today. You always look good. So our question, I'll go ahead and read it because I got it pulled up right here, and it is from one of our Zulon, our middle school ministry students, Nevaeh. She says, "What would be the best way to approach a friend who doesn't know Jesus and try to change their mind?" And I'll leave it at that. And I'm gonna just boom. I just threw it out there, and I'm gonna see who wants to catch that right off the bat.
You know me, I'm not scared. I'm not scared. So I will, when I started thinking about this question, I always take it a few steps back and I think about, first of all, why do we need to share the gospel? And then what does the Bible say? So I reach back into our trusty Bible, and two verses really ring out to me. So first, we share the gospel with other people because God commands us to. It's really is that simple. We talked about this in another podcast. In Matthew 28:19 and 20, say, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." And then the good news is, surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. So God tells us to do it, so that's why we're supposed to do it. But the other piece of it is, because what she's really asking is, how does God tell us to do that? And what I really like is First Peter. And Matt, you really turned me on to this verse. You probably don't even remember it, but it was several years ago. You brought in First Peter into Club 56 back in the day. And what that says is, "But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reasons for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." Let me say that again. "Do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. For it's better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil." And what I will tell you, my personal feeling is, I think about sharing the gospel. We use words like testimony and witnessing. And I am a very, very, I tend to be a black and white kind of person. So I look back at that and I say, what is testimony and what is witnessing? And from my perspective, witnessing is telling what happened to you. So it's not me saying, "Matt, you need to do this and you need to come." Witnessing is telling Matt, "Hey, Matt, I just wanted to share with you, this is what's happened in my life. This is how God has affected me." And as First Peter said, always prepared to give an answer for those who ask you for the hope that you have. So what I'm sharing with people is, I have this faith. It gives me a hope. It gives me a peace. It gives me a comfort. And so I'm going to share with you what that is. And you mentioned things that, and I've heard a lot of people say a lot of different things. And I always think about the guy on the street corner. And we actually have one near our house periodically who screams on the street corner, you know, come to Jesus or you're going to hell. And I always think to myself, is that bringing people to Christ? And I've heard other people say it totally is. And so I kind of take a step back and I go, you know, it's not for me to judge. But what I can tell you is I need to be aware of what I believe in. And then I need to think about why I believe it. And then I need to share that with others. And not pushing it on others, but asking and just sharing with them what I think and what I feel and what the gospel has done for me. And me personally, I think that's the most effective way of bringing the gospel to them. But I just said a lot of words, so I'll throw that out to my fellow hosts. What do you guys think?
That was really good, Randy. You know, building on what you said. Currently, you know, it's kind of interesting when you look back at like Acts and Peter and Paul and they give their testimonies and stuff. One of the things I was thinking as I was kind of prepping to answer this is, you know, the gospel doesn't change. The reality is everyone's broken. Everyone needs a savior, and Jesus is a savior. And without him, I mean, you're hopeless. You have no identity. You have no purpose. I mean, you lose everything, and eventually you're eternally separated from him, whether you like it or not. So the gospel doesn't change, but what does is the culture. And so that's where it gets a little interesting on, you know, I mean, let's just be honest. People don't, in our culture in America, people don't, especially young people, don't have the best view of Christians or the church or, so it's easy when sharing the gospel, sharing that hope and that good news. It's easy to start diving into, well, what does the Bible say about this? What does the Bible say about that? But the reality is, and I know we had a speaker who came a couple months ago and talked about it, you got to get to the foundation. You got to get deeper than that. And one thing that I found super interesting, when I was in college, I was part of a group that really, I think, did a great job sharing the gospel. It was Campus Crusade. And so they were all, I mean, if you came to know Christ or if you were part of the group, you were going and sharing the gospel. I mean, that's what you did. And so we would go, you know, basically cold call people on campus. We'd walk on campus and go and talk to people. And one thing that I was always surprised about, now granted, this is a college campus, right? It's a little different, but how open people actually were to talking about the gospel. I was so surprised. And even I went to a public, super, not fond of Christianity or what we believe in. Even on that campus, super open, because the way that we would approach it wasn't walk up to them, hey, do you know Jesus? Not that you shouldn't. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying the way that we would do it, because of the context we were in, is we would say, hey, we're going around talking to people about their worldviews, kind of the way they view the world. Can we ask you a few questions? And I think maybe only one time out of every single time we went, I had one guy say, no, I'm okay. Every other person, yeah, sure, go ahead. So we start talking. Hey, what do you think's wrong with the world? Well, I haven't really thought about that. Well, that's probably something you should think about. You know, hey, why do you think you exist? I don't really know. Well, probably pretty important. I mean, you're not going to live forever. You know, we get into these questions, and then eventually we would, you know, always talk about, hey, can we share with you, you know, our worldview? Can we share with you what has really set us free? We're talking about Jesus. And it's kind of crazy the way God built some relationships out of that. But what I wanted to just share real quick is Romans 10:14 says this: how then will they call on him, talking about those that call on Jesus, in whom they have not believed? Obviously, if someone hasn't believed, then how are they going to call on Jesus? But then it continues: how are they to believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without somebody preaching? And how are they to preach unless someone is sent, unless they're sent? And I think one thing that's important is there's a quote that a lot of people say. It says, share the gospel and sometimes use words. And basically the heart behind that quote is somehow in our actions we can share the gospel. And in my personal opinion, I don't think that's what the Bible is saying. I think the Bible is clear. We have to use words to share the gospel. Now, what's cool though, and then I'll stop talking, you guys can jump in. What's cool is that Jesus' invitation to people was what? Come follow me. Why? Because he wanted to walk alongside people and show them what a Christ follower was, what it looked like to live in the abundant light. Now, at the same time, he was preaching truth to them. So he was doing both. He was sharing the gospel and he was walking with people. The problem is when we don't do both. The problem is when, and I'm not blaming anyone else, I'm guilty of it. I need to grow and share the gospel. The problem is when we don't share the gospel and we act like, oh, if we're loving, at least people are going to come know Christ. No, they're not. How are they going to know that Christ died for their sins if you're just loving? You have to eventually share them. The other side of the coin is if you're just yelling at people and you don't walk with them and show them how to actually fulfill the Great Commission, which he said, not just to make disciples, but to baptize and to teach them to obey everything he has commanded. And so it goes hand in hand. That was that was spitball fire of random thoughts, but hopefully that was encouraging. And whoever wants to pick up, go for it.
I'll pick up. And I was actually going to share that quote too from good old St. Francis of Assisi. And yeah, I mean, in our lives as followers of Christ, we ultimately must always recognize that it is necessary to use words, and that the testimony of the way we live should match the testimony that comes out of our mouth. And Paul says it this way in Colossians 4. In verse 2, it says, devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. And so before you ever, go and share your faith and your personal story with somebody, be praying for that somebody. Be praying that the Lord would make you watchful, that he would make you aware of opportunities to share of people that desperately need to hear the good news of Jesus Christ and how he's worked and changed your life. And that you, as you are devoting yourselves in prayer, being watchful and thankful, that you be reminded of the goodness of the grace that you've received, so that you have a desire to share it faithfully. Paul continues on, says, and pray for us too, that God may open a door for our message, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. And the question, as it's stated, I think it was to the effect or something, basically saying, so that we might change their minds. It's important to remember that we don't change anybody's mind and we don't change anybody's heart. Only God does that. And so long before you brush off your testimony and really put framework to it, pray that God begins to do a work in that person's heart long before you ever start talking. Because if they're just your words, well, they might be somewhat effective, but not for eternal things. If they're God's words that he placed into your life and given you that story, and you've been praying for that person and praying that you be watchful for an opportunity, then that, if left to his will and his plan, will produce fruit, will draw someone near. Continuing on, Paul says, be wise in the way that you act towards outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. So we ultimately have to be aware that the way that we live our life is a representation of who our life truly belongs to. And there are instances in which the way that we live our lives gives us an opportunity to speak about the goodness of God in our own lives. And then in 6, it says, let your conversation, see, Paul says, you got to live it and you got to speak it. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And I love that. And I love the way that the New Testament talks about salt. And, we could talk about salt being a preservative, but that's not what Paul is saying in this passage. What Paul is saying in this passage is, your words aren't going to preserve anyone, but your words and the way that you live your life could potentially do the other thing that salt does, make people thirsty. As you share in the goodness of God and how he's worked in your life, and you season your conversation with salt, those people are going to go, well, I want that. Yeah. Jesus did the same thing when he taught in parables. Right. He knew that the people in the crowd that had questions were going to continue to seek out the answer to those questions. In the same way that as we carry this story that the Lord has given us, and we share it, and we're watchful and thankful for opportunities that he is going to open up for us, if we share it in a salty way, It's supposed to increase their thirst, but not for any water that we're going to give them, but for the living water that only Jesus Christ can give them. So that's my little 2 cents on it.
Man, that was good. I've never heard the salt, being the thirsty and they're going to want more. They want that. That's really good. I think that I really like this question because this is a question not many students ask and talk about, is wanting to share their faith. It's usually the opposite. They're afraid to. And I remember I was afraid for a super long time. And I didn't understand the importance of why do I need to. I'm afraid to. And I've told you guys before that it didn't really impact me till a buddy of mine passed away that wasn't a believer. And then that's when it clicked for me, like, oh my gosh, I had all this time that I could have, but I was afraid and didn't say anything, or thought, oh, I'll put it off for later. And you don't want to get to that point. I remember feeling super guilty. And I know that wasn't true. The enemy really got me thinking a lot of things about myself that weren't true, but it's not a fun thing to go through that. So the fact that you're juggling this question is great. Now, what do we want to do about it? Well, why do we want to? And it's to invite your loved ones to the kingdom of heaven is amazing. I think we've shared this before. I don't remember if it was on here or not, but imagine that you got infinity tickets to your favorite sporting event, like the Super Bowl or the NBA Finals, the World Series, and you get to invite whoever you want to come with you. You're like, hey, come with me to this, because you don't want to go to those sporting events by yourself. What makes it fun is the atmosphere, the crowd, and you want to invite people to experience this with you. Like for Kevin, if the Packers were in the Super Bowl, he'd invite some of his buddies to go with. He'd be super excited.
That's not going to happen for a while, bro.
And he had all the tickets. He would invite all of his buddies to go with him, and his Lodi crew or whatever, wherever they're from. But same thing with me and the Giants in the World Series, or Randy and the Brewers in the World Series, and Garrett. Whatever you would go to, Garrett. But that's what heaven is we got infinity.
Book club.
And that's what heaven is we got infinity tickets to invite whoever we can to it. We don't want to hold those tickets to ourselves, and we want to make sure we're telling people to come to the greatest experience of all time, and that's heaven. And I love what you guys are saying about the actions part, the words part. My kind of strategy, I guess, if I had to say that, I don't like that word, but I love building relationships first. That way, when I get in a deeper relationship with my buddies, they more will listen to what I have to say and respect what I have to say, and understand that I really do have this genuine love and care for them, and that they know that I'm not coming off judgmental, or they're not good enough that I think anything like it's of them negatively. But the fact that I build relationships first is pretty key. So I wanted to see what you guys thought about that part as well.
I agree with that, but I'm going to actually piggyback on something else you said real quick before we discuss the relationships, because I do agree with that. You talked about the analogy of the Super Bowl. I look at the reason for sharing the gospel from, the fate that we're potentially saving people from. Not we, but he.
No, right.
I look at it this way. If I had the cure for cancer, would I tell people about it? Absolutely. I would blow up the internet and tell everybody, whether they have cancer or not, the cure for cancer. And that's something that attacks our earthly bodies, our temporal beings, right? We, through the gospel of Jesus Christ, have the cure for an eternal issue. And so if we look at it from that perspective, how selfish would it be to not share that with people who are going to suffer a horrible fate if they never actually hear the life-redeeming story from somebody who knows that story in their own. And so that I look at it just from like, man, I'm trying not to be selfish with this gift. Like Jesus says it many ways that we should share. He calls us the light of the world, and he says no one lights a lamp and then puts a basket over it. And that's common sense. A, it's a fire hazard. B, the light goes away. And so it's like, yeah, let your light shine, because people need it. Right? People need it. It's important. It's essential. It's the only thing that's going to secure eternal things. So,
how many times have you been walking in the dark and you stepped on your kid's Lego or toy, and you're like, I wish I had the light. The light is important. It's a good thing. And it's really, if you think of, if you're trapped in a dark room with a bunch of people somehow, and all of a sudden you see a light somewhere, guess where everyone's going to go? Towards the light. Like, that's just the analogy of how appealing a light is and how amazing it is in dark situations. But when you're in a dark room and you see light, people are going to go to the light. It's just in our nature that's what we want. We want the light. We don't want to be in darkness, no matter how beautiful it seems or what you think you get away with. When you see the light in the dark, you want to go to it. And it's harder when you got buddies or friends that are really in bondage, and it's sometimes super, not depressing, but super sad when you try to share the gospel and they just don't want to hear it. And you know what? That's okay. Don't get down on yourself if that's the case. If you think you're trying and they don't want to receive it at that time, that's okay. Do what Pastor Kevin said, and you just keep praying for them. That what you were able to do is you did share the gospel, or you did plant the seed, and God could do with that whatever He wants to do with it. But don't feel bad about yourself if they didn't receive it right away. People are going to reject it. People might want to receive it. It may take people some time. Everyone's different. But the fact that you wanted to say something is great, and that's what we are supposed to do. Is we want to invite people to this amazing opportunity, this amazing cure for cancer, the world. And it's not our decision to say, you're going to take this, and it's not up to us, right? But don't feel bad. Don't feel down if they say no. Just the fact that you said something is sharing the gospel, is planting that seed, is shining that light. So I wanted to throw that out there as well.
Matt, I just wanted to go ahead.
Go, Randy. Go for it.
No, you're good, Garrett. Go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, as far as, a middle schooler or a high schooler, I hope this doesn't come off to like programmatic or whatever, but strategically speaking, like, how do you share the gospel with somebody? I think Kevin kind of hit on this. I think a really good way is ask people questions, because I think what the problem is a lot of times is people, we think they're thinking about all this stuff. They may not be thinking about it. Like, they may not even be thinking about Jesus. They may not even not like Jesus. They may like Jesus. Who knows? And so I think part of it is, and this is, again, I'm not pointing the finger at anyone but myself, we're so afraid of, oh my gosh, if they reject me, what times they just haven't even thought about it, especially if you're talking about middle schoolers and high schoolers. Sometimes the best thing to do, where do you put your hope? What do you think is going to happen when all this ends? I see this virus going around and there's a lot of division. And do you ever just wonder, is all this ever going to end? And you start getting to some deeper questions with people, and all of a sudden, because you got to remember, God made all of us. There's something in us that's made for God, or made in His image. And as I don't remember if it was Kevin or Randy was saying, God's the only one who saves people. But there's something in us that that needs a savior, that needs something that's outside of just what we can figure out in our own minds. And that's getting really abstract. But the point is that asking those questions, I think, starts to kind of stir those affections and stir those things. And all of a sudden, you have a kid who's thinking about eternity and thinking about, and that's why we really need as a church to come around these kids, because you don't want that kid thinking about them by themselves, because how depressing is it to think about eternity if you don't have any hope, right? And so anyways, I just wanted to I think it's a good idea to ask questions. If you're just thinking strategy, hey, how do I talk to my friend? Just ask them questions.
My favorite question, is, what's the point to life? That's my favorite question to ask my buddies. What's the point? I remember there was one night I just texted 5 of my buddies separately. I said, what's the point to life? Can you tell me? And some of them said, I don't know. They said to be happy or to make someone happy, but it's like, okay, then what? Like, we're going to die someday. And really, if you don't, this is super depressing and sad, but if you don't know God and I ask you that question, you're going to come to the conclusion there is no point. There is no point to life. And really, once you get to that realization, that's when you start thinking the bigger picture of eternity. Wow, what is it? We didn't just come to this earth for no reason. We're not just here for no reason to live and die. That's just weird. Like, really, if I didn't know God and I just thought about life, the point of it, there's got to be something greater. There has to be. Because if I just, wow, I'm created, I'm here, and then I die, okay, there's got to be a reason why I'm here. And so that's one of my favorite questions to ask is, what's the point to life? And I kind of build from there. But questions is great. It's always great. Randy, what were you going to say earlier?
You know, it's funny that you talk about questions because you may need to edit this out. You know, there's always comes a time in the podcast where I tell Matt, you might have to edit out some of my comments. But here's what I want to just throw out there. We talk about youth and even adults who don't share faith. And I just want to point out, sometimes we say, oh, it's because they're scared. Oh, it's because of this. It's because of that. I got to be honest with you. I think there's a certain number of people that don't know their faith, that don't understand their faith. And so what I would say is, you know, if I haven't thought about it, if I haven't thought through some of those questions, and I know I'm going to share something with somebody and they're going to ask me questions and I'm not prepared for that, I'm not going to share that with people. So what I think one of the first things I would say to people is, before you start thinking about, and you should be wanting to share your faith, but before you do that, you need to take some time and think about, what do I believe? What do I believe? And here's the second piece. Why do I believe it? Because you are sharing your faith with someone else, and their question is going to be, why? Well, just as that verse in 1 Peter says, you should have an answer for that. And I think we've got to spend time, and it always comes back to this. Whenever I would teach in Club 56, the end of my message was always, so what are we supposed to do? Oh, we need to start reading our Bible. And that really is, again, the message. We've got to get back into the Word, and we've got to be thinking, okay, why do I believe this? And again, because I'm built this way, I will share with you from my perspective. I am evidence-based. I believe in evidence. You know, we talked about witnessing, we talk about testimony. I believe in evidence. So for my faith, I can tell you that the idea that it just makes me feel good, I read the Bible and it makes me feel good, that doesn't work for me. Now, it works for other people and that's okay, but it doesn't work for me. I need evidence. So there are things that when I share my faith with people, I talk about, this makes sense to me. So I would challenge everybody who's watching this podcast to say, hey, why do I believe what I believe? What do I believe? And how would I share that with somebody else to again, witness? Hey, I'm telling you, Garrett, this is why I believe what I believe. And Garrett may say, well, that doesn't work for me. Okay, well, let's talk about that. What are you struggling with and all that kind of stuff? But I got some preparation that I got to do beforehand. There's some things I have to do within myself beforehand. And that doesn't give anybody an excuse. I want to make this clear. Nobody has an excuse not to share the gospel. I don't want you coming back and saying, Randy said on the podcast that I got to do all this stuff first before I share the gospel. Yeah, I think you do. But you got to do that work and you got to share the gospel. So go share the gospel. But get within yourself and talk through, what do I believe and why do I believe it?
Thank you, Randy.
Absolutely.
That's good.
And you can edit that out right now.
Hey, can I just be really practical? Super quick. I know we're going to finish this off. Hey, right now, this is funny that we're doing this question. I was just thinking for us. Right now, our adults are going through a series called Come and See. It's all about the Gospels. It's all about coming and see Jesus. But our part as the congregation is to go and tell. And so if you're a middle schooler or a high schooler listening right now, if you go to bigvalleygrace.org or bvg.org/come and see, or you can just go to our website. There's 3 resources on there. There's a reading plan. So like Randy said, first of all, you got to know who Jesus is. You got to know what you believe. There's a 30-day and a 60-day. You can go through with your parents, but check that out. But the second one is a testimony builder. And if you're like, I don't understand this, well, guess what? There's a kid's version also. And by the way, you're never too old for a kid's version.
Trust me.
Because Randy's exactly right. Other religions would say, hey, I believe this because it makes me feel good. So that can't be the only reason why we believe what we do, although following Jesus does feel good because he loves you. But the point is, bvg.org/come and see. There's a reading plan. There's a testimony builder, so you can learn what you believe, why you believe it. And number 3, a know your neighbor kind of worksheet to get to know people better. But I was just thinking that's so practical. If you're listening right now, just go on our website. There's this resource where you can start building your understanding of what you believe and why you believe it.
Thank you, Garrett. Man, thank you guys. That was fun that we got a question on the YouTube. And if you got questions, make sure that you throw them at us. We love questions. We love receiving them, talking about them. And we need to sometimes do candid conversations with us sometimes in the office or in ministry, because we ask each other questions and talk about stuff all the time. There's times Kevin will come in and tell me about what he was reading and what he learned. Randy asks me questions all the time that stump me. And Garrett over here has a whole different view of ministry, and it's a good thing. And it's super cool how God works in people's lives and the questions we ask each other. And it's a great thing. It's a healthy thing. It's a great way to build relationships and to disciple people as well. But if you have questions, make sure you go to our BBG. Oh, hello, buddy. Speaking of bbg.org student resource page, and you scroll down to the bottom, and right there's got questions. You can click the clickable button, as Pastor Kevin likes to say. It's like my new favorite word. Submit a question, or on our YouTube page, give us YouTube questions, throw it in the chat. We love that. So thank you guys. And Randy, Garrett, Kevin, thank you guys for your input and help, and take care. God bless everyone.